Hello, everybody, and welcome to the special 10th episode of the Two Existential Dudes podcast. My name is Luke,
My name is Andrew.
and we are joined today by a very special guest.
Very special indeed.
The wise, the
Honorable. The excellent. His Majesty.
Mr. Joseph Kozar.
How are you guys? Good to be with you.
We are well.
We are well. How are you?
I'm doing great.
So just before we started the stream, we were already getting into some incredibly good conversation about education. So should we just pick up there where we left off?
I think so. Well, first of all, Mr. Kozar, if you could go through and just kind of talk about your experiences in education and the things that you've learned and how long you've been in it.
Sure. I started off back in the, believe it or not, in the 1980s, working in education, and came to a place where I had to make a decision about what I was going to go into. And I started off in journalism my first year. And the second year, I transferred over to education, and in particular in English. Graduated, I went to Kent State University, then I graduated from Asbury College and decided to stay in Kentucky and got my master's at Georgetown. Worked for 29 years, feels like 39 sometimes, 29 years in education, both at Grant County, teaching 8th grade all the way to 12th grade, and Ryle High School, and I've taught freshmen and juniors, and then creative writing at Ryle. So,
Excellent.
yeah. So I've done pretty much everything that you can do in English, except ironically journalism and yearbook.
Wow.
The two things you started to set out to do.
Exactly.
How funny.
Exactly.
Well, if we're going to get right into this, I'd like to ask you, first of all, what do you think should be the purpose of education?
Well, that's an excellent question. Education should be an opportunity for somebody else to figure out what their purpose is in life and then to expand on that purpose. So you do that by training a teacher all the way through their life. So as they're young and they decide that they might want to do something like teaching, they begin to train in that, both in knowledge and in how to expand that knowledge, or how to teach somebody else. So it's got to be a combination of both. Mm-hmm. And the problem that you see a lot of times is that we either have too much of a focus on one or the other, either on the pedagogy, which is how you teach, or on the knowledge. So somebody who gets a lot of knowledge, but they don't know how to teach it to somebody else. Mm-hmm. And I personally believe that you have to have a very strong balance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because without the content, you can't teach anything really, but without the pedagogy, you can't express that content.
That's something we don't often, I guess, think about when we're thinking about education is how are we teaching our teachers to teach?
Exactly. And I believe that if we're going to talk about any form of reform, we kind of have to talk about it from where does this all start? Mm-hmm. And if we don't begin with how we training our teachers, then I don't think we can even begin to talk about the classroom.
And you would argue that a teaching profession should take more than a bachelor's and a master's degree?
Not necessarily. I think that my frustration, I think, with any teaching system is once teachers get into the field, a lot of times their professional development isn't specific to their core content, Mm-hmm. And I would rather see teachers have opportunities like they do in colleges, mm-hmm. where teachers can take a sabbatical and actually in a high school, mm-hmm. or in a middle school or in an elementary, and go and learn more about their knowledge base. Like I would love to take a year off and just write, or take a year off and go travel to these different places that I teach about, or take some time and take classes in British literature or in rhetoric or debate, things things like that. But sometimes it's very focused on, you know, how do you chunk, or how do you just different things that sometimes I think frustrate teachers because they're not really given the opportunity to go ahead and really choose what they want to learn about, which makes learning exciting, right?
Yes.
Because if you guys get to take an elective and that's really something that you want to take, you tend to do better at it, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
So would you argue that teacher education is too focused on the pedagogy as opposed to really letting them explore the content that they're teaching?
I can't address that specifically to right now, okay? Because I've not taken any education classes. Currently I am back in seminary to get a larger degree,
Right.
but I can't really speak to teacher education that way. My wife is the closest one to that. She finished up about 12 years ago, and it was too focused on the teaching part, and not enough on giving her opportunities to look into music and to think about music ideas. And that's really what where we're at. When we look at the Middle Ages, for example, they kind of limited it to grammar and rhetoric and geometry and astronomy and music.
The mathematical
Yeah,
things you can do.
yeah, and so there was kind of a limited base there, and people were able to really excel. So they could take those areas and then they could expand out to a foreign language, or the study of poetry, or something like that. So that was that side thing. I think an educator has to have the opportunity to get that base, the liberal arts base, and then from there sideswipe it, and then really have a strong focus and be able to take that into a high school and be diverse. I've never wanted a teacher to be like me. I don't want another teacher to think they have to be like me. I want another teacher to give you guys a completely different experience.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so often today it is about standardizing everything so that no matter what classroom you go to, you're learning the exact same thing in the exact same way.
Every class feels the same.
Because, I guess a little bit of foreshadowing, you're all taking the exact same tests.
Yes.
That's true. And there's a danger to that. And that's something that's not talked about. On one hand, I perfectly believe in standards. I mean, everyone has to have, this is what you're ultimately achieving.
Sure.
I believe in skills. Writing, reading are skills. But I believe that all that is based on a foundation of curriculum. Because if you don't have a curriculum, you have nothing to stand on for okay, now you have this curriculum, what skills do you need in order to achieve this at the highest level? So let's take, right now I'm taking Greek. So Greek is a curriculum, right? But I have to have the skills in both knowing the letters, the sounds, the syntax.
Right, each piece of it that comes together.
Exactly. And as you're getting those skills, then the professor decides, ultimately, this is a standard in order for you to say, I've completed this class. What we're trying to do now, in my opinion, is we're flipping this. And the problem is, if you start off with a standard and you say, well, this is the standard, the problem is I don't know as a teacher going into it, what's the curriculum? And somebody could say, well, you can do that with any novel.
So we're almost starting too specific when we need to start
You
in
don't
a general
know the
place and
broad
work
idea.
in.
And
Yes.
that touches on a lot of student complaints about what they think they're learning. An example is people always say, when am I ever going to use this? Because they don't see the bigger picture of
When
what
the
it
bigger
adds up
picture
to.
might be like deductive reasoning or working things out and through that logic, which we're not explained that.
Exactly, and you have to have the foundation in order to build the rooms. Okay, and a teacher's job is, as you're building this curriculum, you have the skills inside, and the workmen are working and putting the skills together into to code, right? That's the standard. Okay, so all this is all a building. Well, what a teacher does when all this is built, the teacher invites you into the first room, right? They say, just like you guys, come on in, guys. and I begin to show you around the house, and each part of it has a different purpose. Ultimately, all called a house or a home, but a dining room has a different purpose than a kitchen or a bathroom. Or, well, I hope so for you guys anyway. But you have all those things.
You never know sometimes.
Right. But you hope that all those things begin to work together, and then you ultimately call this a house. So when I'm putting together a class, say on rhetoric, I'm putting together different pieces: analysis, argumentation, syntax, and you begin to build this, and then you put the skills in there. And as you're building up, you're saying, okay, ultimately this is your standard. And what's your standard? You're going to pass that AP exam.
Mm-hmm. That is a terrific metaphor for what I think, at least, the notion of a liberal education is, as opposed to a vocational or professional education, which is very targeted, very specific, basically only teaching you the content. Whereas I would argue a liberal education is meant to teach you how to think in a way. Again, using that, while you may be learning something very specific on a certain day, it might be about learning deductive reasoning or...
I was thinking of it as like an enlightened learning, as in that you're just learning a lot of things that come together to give a kind of conceptual way of thinking.
Sure. Well, all knowledge is circular.
Right.
Okay. It absolutely is, and they've actually proven that in a study where every single knowledge that you can learn is actually interconnected into a circle. I don't have that immediately available.
I need to get my hands on that circle.
Yeah, I actually
Start
have it on my
checking
phone.
things
I can show it to you. But I told a guy one time, he came up to me and he was, being all surly, and he said, "I don't know why I need to know poetry."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, it's how you fall in love with a girl." He said, "Wait, what?" And I explained to him that you're going to look at her and you're going to say, "You have my heart," or "You are my heart," or, our relationship. And you'll start to put together imagery. And I said, if you understand it better, you're better at winning a woman's heart. And this guy actually came back to me later and said, "You're right." And it was very funny. I mean, I just kind of looked at him and went, "Okay, well, whatever, but let's move on. You still have class to take." But I like this idea that you brought up about the liberal arts education, because it does help you in the way that we think. We need those early, people talk about as if you can separate out knowledge. They talk about like the dead white guys, and we shouldn't be separating out knowledge that way. What we should be doing is thinking in lines of, what do we need as a culture in order to have the best thinkers? And unfortunately, we've kind of gotten away from thinking about thinking to...
Absolutely.
Yeah, how do we get people out on the field better, or how do we do this? And that's not bad necessarily. I mean, I've got no problem with tech schools at all. As a matter of fact, I think there are a lot of colleges that aren't doing a very good job.
Yeah,
I would agree.
Certainly the American public school system, which was my next complaint. I get complaint.
Well, we're being existential, so it's
Certainly.
we're considering the idea.
It goes back to the notion that so many students have, that when am I going to use this? Why am I not learning something that's going to really benefit me in life? Like taxes is the one that's always thrown around. And my argument always is, if we had a liberal education system that worked, that did its job, you would have the critical thinking skills to figure that and so much else out on your own.
Sure.
And it makes you better at learning things as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've certainly found, particularly through math classes, where you're taught an idea, how to do it, and then just use that repeatedly over and over until it's ingrained in you. When you're not so much taught, okay, here's this concept and what you need to do, work it out through reasoning and your logic, which might be just as helpful.
And here's the thought. There's always a little bit of kickback whenever somebody keeps going on in education. People they get suspicious about that. So I preach at a relatively small church, maybe 70, 80 people on a good Sunday. And one of the things that was brought up is I said, well, I'm taking a Greek class right now. And they said, well, why do you need to take a Greek class? And I said, so that I can read the New Testament in its original language. Mm-hmm. And the idea is, well, we have it in English. Why do you do that?
Right.
Because not only am I going to be able to read Greek in the New Testament, I can read Aristotle or Plato in the original language. Mm-hmm. I can begin to work on classical Greek. But it's all about a way of thinking. Now I'm thinking in lines of what were the original New Testament writers? How did they think when they were putting together their syntax? I'm not looking at my language and my culture, but I'm actually understanding another culture and another group of people at a different time. And somebody will say, well, why does that matter? And I said, because we need that in our society. More than ever in the history of America, do we need to begin to go back to what we were thinking about and the reasons why we learn what we're learning, and not forget that past. It will help us with our future because we understand where we came from. When we talk about history, we tend to think in negatives, where we failed. What about the positives? There are many, many times where we did the right thing.
We wouldn't be here if we didn't, after all.
Exactly. And when we look at the mistakes in the light of the good things that have happened or the positive things that we've done, then we begin to put it together and we begin to see what we really are as a culture. So that's,
effectively breaking it down to its parts and examining each of them.
Exactly. And when you're talking about that liberal arts education, somebody says, well, I want to become a medical doctor, but why do I have to learn a foreign language? And you're saying because we have to interact with different cultures and you have to think in different kinds of ways. So it's not just in the medical line, it's in all lines, in all directions. Why do I have to learn poetry if I'm going to become a physicist? Because we look at the stars and what do we begin to do? We describe them, right? Mm-hmm. And why do we give them those descriptions or why do we give them those names are already in the back of your head because of that poetry? I mean, why do we name Mars Mars? I mean, God of War. I mean, yeah, you're thinking,
why is
God
that?
of War. Yeah, and Phobos and Deimos. I mean, fear and destruction, I think, is Deimos. I'm not sure, but I definitely know that Phobos is fear. I should know because it's Greek. Anyway, I'm failing already. But it's fear. Why is Mars
right
God of War, and why is that fear? So when you start to see that, you're already seeing poetry, coming forth. Stories. What do we do all the time? I stood around class and I tell stories. Why? Because we create our own mythologies as we go along. Groovy Guy was just a mythology. You have a character, you have a storyline. Yeah, it's all just mythology.
Should we tell that story?
Would you care to?
Do we have a quick time for a quick aside?
I think
that
we
story.
Oh, we got to chase a rabbit.
Groovy Guy is worth an aside.
Uh-oh.
So, Mr. Kozar, I'm actually not super familiar with the story or its origins or development, but we were around at Groovy Guy's end, I guess. Mm-hmm. Groovy Guy's not with us anymore.
The late Groovy Guy. Would you care to go through his beginnings?
Oh, where he came from? When I was hired at Ryle, Mr. Turner asked me, what type of teacher are you? And he gave me a few options. I honestly don't remember the options, but I said one of them was storyteller. I said, I'm a storyteller. It fits with a narrative, but I said, what I do is I create a mythology in a classroom. There will be certain phrases that I will use over and over and over again. And what it does is it ties
memes, if you will.
Exactly.
There are a lot of phrases.
Savage, or take out 2 pieces of paper or whatever.
Most of which show up in this podcast, actually.
Oh dear.
Quite a few of them.
Yeah, so they one day, it was actually the second year I was at Ryle, because the first year I was too busy trying to figure my life out. How I fit into the place, what the system is, things like that. So the second year I really got kind of my groove on.
Foreshadowing.
But I was kind of mad at my AP students because they really didn't work very hard on this essay. So I took a whole bunch of papers that needed to be recycled, and I said, I am not going to take the time to grade these if you guys aren't going to take these seriously. And I pitched them into the trash can, and this kid looked up, and this girl started to tear up, and she said, you didn't really just throw all our essays away, did you? I worked really hard on that. And this kid goes, he didn't throw them away. He's a big old cozy bear.
Oh, no.
Well, I was Kozar the Savage and Swashbuckler and the Czar of English at Grant County. Now I'm Cozy Bear, and I'm like, well, how did this happen?
Gotta withhold the title.
Right. So I thought, that's ridiculous. I'm not down with this. But they called me Cozy Bear, and that's kind of stuck ever since, a little bit on the background. The next year, I didn't have anything for Halloween, so I threw on a jacket, my hat, and sunglasses, and I had this shirt that was literally from the 1970s. It's my dad's shirt. I still wear it. It's got books all over. It's weird.
Love that.
And somebody said, "What are you?" And I said, "Groovy guy." I mean, and they all thought it was funny, and they said, "We'd love it if you dress like this every day." So every once in a while, and then I'd show up at football games dressed up, or
Yeah.
volleyball or something like that, dressed up like him, and it built into the persona and the mythology. It's goofy and it's fun.
Just as it should be.
Oh yeah, we got there through mythology of the classroom.
So then what was the point of that mythology?
Mythology helps us to remember things because it gives us a story to base it all on. So when you start backtracking, you start to go, yeah, I remember the day that we did this. That was the same day that Mr. Kozar was talking about this. And I found I had a kid who one time, he said he was special needs. He was in my AP class. He passed the test, and he came up to me the next year, and he said, when I got to that test, he said, I started looking through those things, and he said, I didn't think I learned a thing in your class. And he said, I started going through there, and I got answer after answer after answer. I knew the answers. And I looked at him, I said, well, it's ninja teaching. He said, ninja teaching? And I said, yeah, I sneak up on you guys. You never know you're learning something.
Yeah.
You think I'm being a goofball, but really, there's a lot of stuff that's embedded.
This is really interesting on the drive here. And I've said it many times before to individuals when I've talked about your class that I'm still not confident it was a real class because because there was very little, it felt like curricular content that we actually learned. But you saying that kind of opens that back door and makes me realize, well, now hold on, everything we're discussing here and the way I'm thinking kind of is what I learned in that class.
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I would argue, brilliant.
So much,
Right.
so much more than those structured classes where the teacher just reads what's written in a textbook.
Well, if you don't have, again, I can give you lists. And in some ways, I did give you some of that. But if you don't have anything to anchor that to, if you don't have that foundation, then at some point that house is never going to get built.
Absolutely.
And so, again, I keep saying, if you try to build a house from top down,
That doesn't work.
you can't do that. As a matter of fact, Jonathan Swift talks about that in Gulliver's Travels, about the scientists trying to build houses from the top down and how wonky it ends up being.
Of course.
But it's something to try. But everyone's looking around going, why would you do that? And so we can try different kinds of reforms. The downside to that is some of them ultimately are damaging because you guys don't have that many years. We can't keep experimenting on you to the nth degree. And I do worry about this sometimes. I see a new book come out on a reform, and suddenly school systems throughout the country are trying these different things, but they don't know if they'll actually work. And the problem I have is you shouldn't be experimenting with education is basically a very simple idea. I decide what you need. You need to, let's say you needed to learn better, needed to read better. The biggest thing to do is read more. Right. Just read more. It's a skill. It's like bike riding or playing football or an instrument.
You really just have to do it more to get into it.
Just have to do it more. And the more that you do it, the more you start to see patterns. And once you see the patterns, then you can get into more complicated patterns. And then the more complicated patterns, don't ever be afraid of a big book. It's no different than a little book.
Just more pages.
Just more pages, right.
It's another phrase you would use.
Right. So I tell students all the time, it's like, if it's 800 pages, it's just more reading. It's not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid of it. If you want to write a book, you write a couple of pages a day, and in a year's time, you'll have 600 pages.
Yeah.
It sounds scary until you break it down. Every day, just write a couple of pages. Every day, write a sheet of music. And pretty
Right.
soon you have a whole catalog.
That's absolutely true. In my personal experience that you seem to be kind of alluding to there with writing music, I really didn't learn from books or teachers or anything until my sophomore year of high school. So that was 5 years prior of just doing things and seeing what happens. It makes my earlier stuff absolutely hilarious, and it's great to listen to it. But you can really see that progression of learning just from experimenting
Sure.
and hearing how things sound, just as reading more teaches you to get better at it.
Exactly. And if I were to change something in high schools and middle schools, people would look at me and they'd say, "What?" I would add recess. Now, I wouldn't add a recess where you're required to go outside and throw like dodgeballs at each other or something like that. But I would give you the opportunity to have just 50 minutes to yourselves to go and to practice whatever you wanted to practice the way you wanted to practice it. So you want to go practice an instrument or work on some music that you're doing, something experimental. You wanted to play cards. I think there are a lot of things that you could do, or somebody wants to go run on the track, or they pick up a football game with a Nerf ball or something.
Yeah.
I think that's all legitimate. I found as I've retired, I've just walked around my yard and started writing poetry again. And I thought, there was this part of me that was kind of arguing with me, and I said, I need to get back to that literature side and touch base with that, because I've been so far into the rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't need to lose those things that have been gifted to us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'll use that as a segue.
I was just going. He was talking, and then that bit at the end threw me off. But I was going to segue as well. Where were you going to segue?
I'm going to administration.
I was going to.
You go first. You go first.
I was going to use that recess idea as a sort of a segue to what would students use that recess period for? Because whether you think that the deterioration of education caused it, or the internet caused it, or whatever, or media caused it, episode 5.
Go listen. Gotta plug them.
Regardless of where that started, it seems today that students have a lack of work ethic.
Okay.
Almost.
I don't know that it's a lack of work ethic as much as just a lack of focus. I think, and I see this both in young people, but also in adults. We tend to have a list of things that we need to get done, and those can be very pragmatic and necessary. But a lot of times we don't get to the things that probably are even more important.
Yeah.
And things like social media and video gaming and all those things, I don't have a problem with watching a movie or video games or anything. I mean, those are all I think they have their place. But they can also be just time killers for no real reason. And I've had to deal with that a little bit with retirement, where you guys are down in my basement, and I have this area over here where I work on my seminary work. And there's a big giant TV right over here. And it can be tempting. You start off with, it can be tempting to have it as background noise, and then it can be tempting to get caught up in the narrative that's going on the screen. Same thing with social media. When no one's around, how much more social media do you use if there's nobody keeping you accountable?
Significantly more.
Exactly. And it's not that it's all bad. You are reading, you are doing some things, but I've found that I have to set a timer and actually cause accountability so that I don't get lost into that. So it's like, okay, I'm going to check some things, blah, blah, blah. I got 15 minutes. And when it's 15 minutes, it's like, okay, time to get back to what I'm doing. And then, like I said, with the recess, the idea is you do need a break. I know, after I've been studying for a couple hours, I just need to go outside for a little bit and just get a breath of fresh air, take a walk, because you're thinking about all these. And in all honesty, 6 periods in a day, when you get to college, it feels easier in one sense because you have 2 classes you're dealing with, and you have 3 classes the next day, and you're back to 2 classes and 3 classes. But it doesn't feel like you have every minute where you're on.
Yeah.
Or there's somebody there telling you this is what you need to think about.
Yes.
And so personally, I always knew you guys coming in, you needed to laugh a little bit. You needed to relax. Sometimes I was, take out 2 pieces of paper and I wasn't taking any prisoners. It's like you're done.
Oh yeah.
But other days I knew I could just see it in your faces. It's like they're worn out. I don't know what's going on, but with the AP groups, you guys probably had 2 or 3 tests that day, and sometimes I just change my lesson plan on the fly. It's like, nope, they're not ready for this. I'm going to get bad work, and they're tired. So we do something lighter. And I'd have some people who'd think that they were tricking me into something, but like, I don't even remember. I was talking to somebody about this in class the other. Been doing a Bible study over here at my house after school, and so somebody was telling me about this time that they talked me into telling stories, and I went, "Oh no, you don't understand what happened." And when you tell them the whole broader thing, they're going, "Yeah, you're right. That did happen that way." And I went, yeah,
We have a
we had a joke that if we could just like say the phrase standards-based grading, we would have the rest of the class to ourselves, because we would usually get you to talk about it for the entire period. Although now, I don't know if we were in as much control as we thought.
No, because the class is about rhetoric. The class is about debate. So there was a lot of things and you'd be surprised at how many times I was listening for cues from you guys about what do you want to talk about. Because if I find stuff that you want to talk about, the conversation's much more interesting for everybody, right?
Right.
So I started off, and if I can get you guys going, cell phones are going to be canceled. We're going to get rid of the cell phones, and I can get 40 minutes on that straight out without me saying another word.
Yeah.
Another peer of ours who was in our class, first name Ryan, won't say the last name. He often bragged a lot about how he would get you off on tangents and stuff.
Yep. Nope.
It was all planned.
Just no.
Well, I'm not going to say every single thing was planned, but I had a class. This is very funny. Came in and I handed out these essays, okay, and there were 5 essays on there, and this girl immediately, without even giving me a second to say anything, said, "This is ridiculous. You're going to make us write 5 essays?" And I said, "Well, how many do you want to write?" She goes, "Well, no more than 3." And went, "Okay, you guys write 3 essays." Well, guess what my plan was?
Oh no.
2. So the next class, this is what's really funny. The next class came in and they said, we're going to write 3 essays. And I said, "Are you going to listen to the instructions?" They said, "Yes." And I said, "All right, I'm giving you a list of 5 potential essays here. You choose 2. And they went, "Ah." So the next day, this girl comes in and she's so mad. She's like, "You made us write 3 essays." And I said, "No, you made the class write 3 essays because you weren't willing to listen to me before we got started."
That's brilliant. I love that.
But that's the kind of stuff that I changed it on the fly because the students decided. You made a choice. It was kind of funny, but
That's very funny.
yeah.
So going back to an earlier point here when we were discussing how the different methods of teaching keep changing every few years, I wanted to ask, what is the purpose of the administration then? Because many times we see it just as a research body almost, when traditionally it would have been a disciplinary body.
That's an interesting idea. Well, let me say this to begin with. I was a reading and writing consultant at Grant County for, I believe, 6 years. Certainly the cluster leader for, I don't know, 14 years, something like that, which meant I trained the teachers on how to teach you guys to write, okay, in their specific field, and to get you guys ready for the portfolios. So I had to go to specialized training, and then I went to extra classes at UK and also at Georgetown, and I trained in this. Then they eventually made me the writing consultant, and then the reading and writing consultant, or the literacy consultant. They called it different things. I wrote my own job description. They came to me and said, would you be willing to do something like this? And I said, yes, but with the idea that I would not leave the classroom. And the reason why I didn't want to leave the classroom is so many people who get into these fields leave the classroom and never know if anything's actually working.
Right.
So I could stay in the classroom, continue to practice what I'm doing and get better at it. At the same time, go into other classrooms and say, okay, let me help you write the curriculum so that you're embedding writing and reading skills into agriculture or ROTC or the special needs classes or whatever. And we did focus, okay? You guys needed something very different in for perhaps an advanced placement class than what band would need. Well, how do you embed reading and writing in band?
You really don't.
Well, you'd be surprised, because what we would do is, for band, you guys would have a journal, and then you would write about your practices and what skills you felt you needed to do, what music that you were in particular listening to at that time. How was that influencing your skills? What people do you want to listen to or hear compositions from? And so I kind of helped embed that. And it wasn't a lot of writing, but it was something to help you to think about music.
Yeah, a reflection to get yourself more into the art of music, thus.
And we decided once a month, it wasn't quarterly, but it was once a month, you guys would have a reading that you would take home from band on a particular type of music, and talk about how your instrument would fit into that kind of composition, and how would you rearrange it and things like that. How could you? So there were some things that I did with that kind of work. Now, all that said, with literacy, I had to work very closely with administration. What I found is, when I did research, I found that there were a lot of things that we were doing in education that first didn't have any true research to it. They would say it did, but they had absolutely no proof. One study I was reading where they wanted to try to put something into that particular district, I found the study that they were talking about dealt with one school, 1 year, with a relatively small number of students, like maybe 100 students, and they talked about the improvement from 1 year to the past, and I went, that's not a true study. There's no
1
control.
year.
Right, there's no control, there's no...
I have a personal example of this. My brother's middle school, as we were leaving middle school, they were implementing a system where it was basically virtual learning, but you were at school.
Mm-hmm.
So the teacher didn't do a whole lot.
Yeah, I believe the teachers became the, quote, facilitator, I think it was.
Proctor,
Yeah.
So what happened was, in order to presumably boost the numbers, they chose at, quote, random students that would be selected for the program, because not everyone was going to do it.
Right.
And what my brother got back to me with was, it was not random in the slightest. They took the people with the highest test scores and put them in this program so that later, when they took the test, they could say, look how much better these students who took the program did compared to everyone else.
Sure. And I've seen this in education before, not specifically with districts I worked for, but where they would tell people, don't let your students score real well at the beginning. Just tell them, don't try real hard. Things like that. They wouldn't say fail or anything, but they would say they wouldn't take it seriously, and then the students would kind of do a mediocre job. And then later they would say, you need to take this real seriously, and we'll give you rewards, and we'll do all this, and we'll do. And that's kind of a natural feel to what we're supposed to be doing in education. I on one hand, you have to understand where I came from. CARA, Kentucky Education Reform Act. They called me a CARA baby because I came in the first year after it was implemented. And that did some amazing work for the state of Kentucky. It was probably illegal because a judge just kind of shoved it through without legislation and looked at the legislators and said, you have to fix this and you have to fund it. And
That's a little questionable.
Well, there's a much longer story here, but it probably was a little bit. If somebody had fought it, they might have had some traction had they taken it up through ranks. But the legislators, to their credit, although I'm not sure this judge did the right thing, or these group of judges, Kentucky Supreme Court, although I'm not sure that they did it all the right way, the legislators were smart enough to say, you know what, this does need to happen. We've got places in Kentucky where teachers, there's so much nepotism. They're literally going in and just reading newspapers, and they don't care if the students are learning or not. And they had a huge illiteracy rate in certain areas. And I'm not going to go through this, but you could point and say, they're not teaching, they're not teaching, they're not teaching. Mm-hmm. And with the idea that these same students would be going immediately into the workforce as soon as they could drop out at 16.
Yeah.
And they would go into that field, and they would stay in that field for pretty much the rest of their lives. Now, nothing wrong with those fields that they went into. But you're really hurting your whole populace when people can't read and write, when they can't think, when they can't do for themselves. And so when those industries go away or change, they can't change with it.
Absolutely unemployed. You can't, and they have no way of going anywhere without that education.
Exactly. And if you can't read and write, you can't change to the technology base. Mm-hmm. So whatever field we're going into now, there's a lot more technology than when I first started. Mm-hmm. Good grief, we were doing VHSs. So sad.
When the teachers would roll in with one of those.
You knew it was a good day.
Oh, the overhead projectors.
A rolling TV wouldn't come.
Oh, the rolling TV, yeah.
That was a good day.
Or the overhead projectors, and it's like, this is so technical. Click, and there's a big light, and it's beamed up on the wall.
Like the reels.
Yeah, the reels. Yeah. You write all your notes on the reels. It's ridiculous. But, but that is a form of technology, and it changes every so often, and you have to be able to adapt and grow. So,
certainly.
Yeah. But going back to what you were talking about with administration, administration in a modern school has changed to some degree. I've always personally, because of where I came from and what I've experienced, I always saw it as, you guys were the kids. I'm kind of like mom. They're kind of like dad. We're talking, the traditional model, right? So, dad needs to make sure that we get everything that we need to keep the household functioning. I need to make sure that the kids are getting done what they need to get done. And if I need to go to him and say, deal with this, and again, somebody would argue, well, that's so ridiculous. And that's fine. But I'm going to say it generally worked, and administration slowly over time needed more support. So they needed a guy who knew reading and writing, could work with the teachers, work with the students who were really struggling. Where does that all come from? Curriculum, right? And then skills, and then ultimately to build them up to that standard. And you needed those supports. If you look at the monies, the support staff for principals and not teachers, the support staff for principals has grown by 600% from the 1970s. And so what does that look like? Well, education has become more complicated. So we need additional support for the librarians, and we need additional support for the counselors. We need additional support for, the principal himself. And we need a school psychologist, school nurse. We need an SRO. And so we keep adding these layers that aren't specifically teachers. And so if you wanted to say something like, well, what would be your dream school, what would it look like? And this is going to shock some people. but sports would be a completely separate entity away from the high school. The sports programs would actually have to rent the stuff from the high school, but would have the coaches, everybody would be hired by an outside entity. The food service again would be outside the school, and then that way the principal can focus on what he should be focused on, and that is his teachers and the students. He doesn't have to deal with the food service program or the sports. You have an AD, and that AD is hired by the community. The coaches are hired by the community directly. I'm not saying everything, like band and choir, I think are still academic. So I'm not talking about every single thing, but that way you free up
Those larger programs that take a lot of time to deal with.
a lot of money too, a lot
Absolutely.
of resources.
And it would take out some of that need for so many supporting people, so many individuals that supported the principal.
Right. Or that people have to make compromises even. If you have the sports programs completely separate from the school, they can pay attention to the school or not pay attention to the school, but that's up to the community. The community now decides, do we want any of our kids flunking a class and playing a sport? But see, right now the principal has to deal with all that, and
Every single
part. I don't know how that's a discipline issue. But it ends up becoming kind of a discipline issue. So the principals actually, in my opinion, of all the characters in this whole scenario that have gotten kind of a struggle, it's the principals.
Absolutely.
Because they're pushed on from the top to keep up scores, and sometimes their jobs are held on the line, which to me, how are you being held accountable for something that somebody else is doing or not doing?
Right.
So then you have to put pressure on the teachers, which again is an unnatural bend. You've got to make sure that Andrew and Luke pass. And I'm going, how do I make them pass? This is not a discipline issue.
You can't make that happen. You can help, but you can't force it.
Right. And we hopefully you have a strong community. You can talk to people. Personally, one of the things that I did with students that I knew were struggling, I call all their parents the first month. Say they're doing great. Why? Because the first month, everybody usually does their work. I mean, almost nobody doesn't do anything from day one. So I had a kid who 2 months later starts acting up, and I call and I say, I'm having a problem with this kid. And the mother's like, I heard her on the phone turn around and say, that is the only teacher who's ever said anything nice to you about you. Are you seriously acted up in his class? And it was hilarious. And I'm like, and he comes back and he's like, I'm sorry, Mr. Kozar, I really like you. I don't want to act up at you.
I'm pretty sure that happened to my sister.
Oh, really?
I think she had a teacher do that as well, like call and say they're doing a great job. And my mom was like, what's the catch? What's going on here? Because you never get that.
Right.
You never do.
Right. And how do we all function? We all want encouragement, right?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Words of affirmation, if you will.
There you go.
We feast on it.
There you go.
I've just been over here making connections to how I can
Well, right.
lead the discussion.
Did I always give somebody a pen or a pencil if they asked for one?
No. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I told you that. I always had that stuff.
Yeah. It's been a while.
Yeah. So if you guys said pen or pen, why? Because I need you to get to work. But that's an act of service too. I mean, it's like, here, just take a pen, go, get to work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And guess who usually didn't have a pen that would ask for it? It's Ryan.
I don't think he hears this. It's okay.
It's fine. We can make fun of him. It's okay. Once we're famous, we can give him $5 as compensation. All right. So, Luke, do you have any questions before I go into some deeper ones?
Deeper ones. No. Be our guest.
Okay. So, you mentioned before how schools now have a lot of this extra administration being involved in different things. And I wanted to ask, should it be the school's responsibility to offer social help, such as school counselors, or should that mostly be an outside of school endeavor?
Well, the reason why they do it is for convenience. Okay, it makes sense to go ahead and to offer those services in-house. It makes it a quicker turnaround. Plus, people are on the ground right there with it. So like a resource center or a school psychologist can immediately begin evaluation, which is a little problematic if you have to send people outside the building. Sometimes they won't go. Sometimes they change their mind about what is actually going on. Um, so on one hand, I always hesitate whenever we get away from what is the primary focus of a school, right?
Right.
And every time we get away from that, I start going, we're kind of missing what we're supposed to be doing.
It's something that annoys me. I mean, I know it's their job. I know they have to keep us safe, but it always irks me a little when I hear teachers say our job is to keep you guys safe.
Yeah, and I've even said that because I understand what they mean by that, but I get what you're saying also. But here's the thing. I would say that even without the school. Like I drive the speed limit, my wife doesn't like it that I drive the speed limit. She wants to go faster, right? So one of the things that I say to her is my number one job is to get us there safely. So I get what you're saying, but on the other hand, there's an adult side of this that says, yeah, but you guys have to feel the ability to come into a classroom and not feel threatened by a bully or not feel like somebody's going to get hurt or something like that. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Because truthfully, you do have to have a safe environment to achieve the best education. But I
Right.
do wonder sometimes if that balance is a little too focused on the former.
Right, and that can be the danger. You're exactly right. So, if we get too far off into that other direction, where it becomes only about, you know, for example, the reason why I would separate out food service is because the school then is no longer responsible for getting those federal funds and then keeping track of who's doing what or why they're doing it, and it puts a different kind of accountability on this. But a lot of pressure was put on Mr. Turner to make sure that everything's done exactly the right way. And I would prefer it be kind of set up a little differently so he's not worried about that. I mean, I don't know that he was directly involved in the hiring or firing or anything like that, but or the books, but he is responsible. When those things are separated out, I think it gives the accountability in a different spot and it helps, so maybe we have resource centers, but we have them slightly off campus. And maybe we have school psychologists and even SROs, but they're not specifically tied directly to the building or under the building principal. Although I understand why they are. I do. It's just it's hard on a principal. And again, it kind of puts the pressure back on the teachers then in unnatural ways because the principal has expectations that, yeah.
Right.
I wanted to just to go back one more time to what I was saying about safety. I think the logical extreme of that is not just protecting students' physical safety, but their, I guess, mental safety, if you will.
Right.
In that, and this is where you get into the issue of free speech being restricted in favor of in favor of the what's the word I'm looking for?
I spaced out, I'm sorry.
In favor of lack of offense to students,
Right.
specifically at colleges.
Well, I think there's an age thing to think about on one hand. For example, I wouldn't give some of the novels that you give at junior and senior level to fourth graders. Okay,
Of course not.
Right. I wouldn't bring up certain topics in a debate in the same way to like even middle school. But I think by the time you guys hit junior, senior level, I think we should be able to have reasonable conversations. But we're a very polarized community right now.
Certainly.
Absolutely.
And I don't know how we're going to fix this unless people are just willing to start to say, you know what, I don't know why we're so angry and fighting all the time. It's okay that you have a difference of opinion on this. I mean, and one of the things that I think always helped this is education, is actually reading the early writings and thinking through the topics. It's certainly existentially, hypothetically, going through scenarios. And at the end of it, you kind of go, okay, I think I've got a handle on this. Let's see what this looks like in real life.
Interesting. Very good point to make.
Mm.
An important one. All right, next question. As with your great experience, how did you find that respect was best earned in the classroom? We've talked a little bit before about how much of that respect is necessary, but I'd like to know
and
how
different examples of who we have respected and have not respected in the classroom.
Well, the first thing is I never really cared whether you guys respected me or not. I think that's the funny part. Is my youngest son one time said to me, "You know, you're like a kid in the classroom that nobody can write up." And I was kind of the point being is that I really didn't care that you guys, whether you thought my outfits were good or weren't good, or whether my hair was perfect or not perfect. I didn't care.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't happen immediately, you know, and there's a lot of places where I got accolades, compliments, things like that over the years, and I finally kind of got. I don't mean to sound dumb, but I kind of got bored with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I don't care, and you'll get that. You'll get to that place too. I mean, it's just life just gets you to a different position. You just think, I don't need everybody's approval, and I know that to do my job right, I'm gonna make you guys mad at times or irritate you anyway. You're like, oh, I don't want to do this. So I really didn't care about that. And the thing about it is, once you get a track record, it already starts to build. So some of you guys, I've actually had people say, well, I'm so sad I didn't get into your class. And, you know, this teacher's blah. I'm like, that teacher's a perfectly reasonable teacher. And you guys are essentially doing the same things I'm doing. Why do you guys like me and not like that person? And the issue really is more of kind of, I had a track record and everybody says, oh, you want to take Kozar.
Yeah, we might have had a role in that this year, in that we're always talking about your class to our friends that are in lower grades, and we'll always be like, well, take AP English so you can get Kozar. Oh wait, he's retired now.
Right, but what did I do is, you know, I think where it really comes from is, I gave you guys hard topics, and we'd sit there and we'd talk about stuff, and I'd listen and I'd bounce stuff off, or I'd, you know, play devil's advocate. I mean, I got one kid mad at me, and people were filming it. We talked about climate change, and I finally looked at him, and at one point I said, "You haven't done any research on this. You're just quoting off of 10 pages out of your science book. You haven't given me anything." And he got so mad, and I looked at him. I said, "Now ask yourself the question: why are you mad? Absolutely, why are you mad?" And he said, "Because you made me look stupid." And I said, "No, I definitely didn't make you look stupid." And this was all filmed. I mean, people were like sending this thing out. And I'm like,
oh,
yeah, this is like before we had a stronger hold on the cell phones. But he came back and he apologized to me because he said there was one thing out of that you absolutely were right about. And I said, oh, no, there was more than that, but go ahead. And he said, you're right, I didn't do any research on it. And I said, can I help you with this? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, I actually care about this. This is one of those areas that, you know, somebody might actually be surprised that I'm actually interested in this area. I have a bookshelf with probably 15 books on it. Would you be willing to read both sides of the issue? And he said, yeah. And I said, guess what? There aren't just two sides to this issue. And he went, what do you mean? I said, I'm going to give you a book that's going this direction, going that direction. I'm going to give you one that just is facts. And he read them, and he read 3 books. I said, I've got a lot more, but he, you know, didn't take the time. But that was a time where I think everybody saw that I was trying to respect him enough that I'm not going to just agree with you, and I'm not going to just disagree with you. I'm going to give you the opportunity to truly learn about what you believe in or don't believe in.
That is a great way to put it. I find so often when you get into these particularly controversial topics, it really is, you can learn this side or this side, but so many of the times I want to learn both, right, to really get the full understanding of the picture, because really only by doing that and supplementing the actual facts of the case can you have a genuine understanding and make a fair judgment that isn't based on just, honestly, tribalism.
Right. And it was, do you remember the lesson I gave you guys at the very beginning of the school where I went around and I asked you what color you liked? And I said, and I if you didn't say green, I said you're wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you said blue or something. I'm like, you're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. And then when they said green, I said, you're right. Now, see, that's the weirdest kind of tribalism. It's like it's all based on our preferences, and we always have to keep looking back at where do our ideas come from.
This gets me livid sometimes when people have these extended arguments about pineapple on pizza and name calling about these very superficial topics like whether Crocs are good or not.
Right.
things
And
like
people
that.
get so inflamed about them as if it was a war.
But it's kind of telling of what's happening with the bigger picture. Honestly, if I walked in and saw you eating pineapple on your pizza, I literally don't care.
Yes.
And that's what I'm saying is it's like, now would I put pineapple? I don't know. I wouldn't, but it doesn't matter what I would do or what I wouldn't do. You're eating the pizza, none of my business. I don't care. And there's a level of me that's a little bit libertarian on that, on a lot of things, where I'm very free speech, get kind of libertarian and think that's why, and this goes back to the recess thing for high school students. I think you need time to work some stuff out, to sit and go, you know what? Mr. Kozar made a real interesting point. What do you think about that? And then you guys are sitting there, like I said, playing dominoes or cards or, I'm not saying anything illegal, but, you're just sitting there, doing something fun and relaxing. Guess how much easier it is to learn when you're kind of relaxed. Right? Not too
Certainly
relaxed.
some of the best conversations I've had have been over a pizza or something like that. Just kind of there.
Sure.
Ours after doing incredibly stupid things, specifically in the school parking lot with involving a car and a sunroof and windows and lots of people. Okay, I'm getting a little too far, but
Best put, we were idiots. Let's say that.
yeah.
And yet we had an incredibly deep and very reflective discussion shortly thereafter. And those two things were honestly two different kind of people.
Sure.
And yet that was what made each of those so much more valuable.
Right.
And that you could be an absolute bonehead and also have these great discussions.
I believe everyone is a philosopher. I really do believe that. But I remember, evenings at Denny's near UK. From Asbury College, we'd go out there and we're sitting there talking about God and philosophy and just different things. But I've also heard people who you would never expect it's like, well, they're not going to college, but they have these deep, wonderful thoughts about life. And it may sound simplistic, but it's really getting to kind of the heart of what's really going on there. And to not it's like the pineapple on the pizza. Don't underestimate anybody's ability to understand life or to have some reflection on it that you sit back and you go, that is really good. I'm going to brag on this real quick. I know we're kind of getting close on time, but
we can go
we
for
don't
24 hours if you like.
Oh, okay.
We can go whenever you're.
I had a project where there were two projects that I've always cherished my whole career. One is that students had to make a film in the 9th grade for their final. So because we've been talking about narrative and short stories and novels the whole year, they had to actually create a story. And those were really, really good. And I loved doing that project.
It's a fun project. I would do that, honestly.
Oh, yeah. And I had so many people who would rather do that. And they had to show, the characters, the setting. They had to show everything that they've learned in their script. And they had to write a script and they had to film it and everything. Everybody loved it. Almost everybody would get an A on it. I mean, so they loved that idea. And then there was a little bit of a writing part to it, but it was fine. It was just not that big. But when I taught juniors, no, it was seniors, they had to do a kind of like what Ryle does, where you guys have to do your
Exit project?
exit. Yeah, it's the senior exit thing. I kind of did that at Grant County intuitively. I taught seniors for the last 6 years. and they would have to make a film about a particular part of their lives that showed me something about themselves for real, what their character was like. And I had a kid he was not a great English student, wasn't horrible, but he just wasn't real good. And he did one on bull riding. I mean, I wanted to give him like 150% because I didn't know a thing about bull riding, but he was on the national circuit. I know, as a junior bull rider.
Wow.
And this guy taught me, he showed the equipment. He's putting on the equipment while he's talking about it. He's natural. He shows how you get onto a bull, where the dangers are, what people have to watch out for, why the clowns exist, why the barrels are there. He's everything. He's explaining, and he's doing it in such a way that it was so well. I thought, you could have put this out on a PBS or something. I mean, this is so well done. And I actually, I probably popped him a few other assignments just because this one was so well done. I was like,
Yeah.
dude, you earned and he earned my respect. But those are the kinds of real life things that not only is he learning a lot about how he's having to think about a lot of things. Why do I do what I do? Why do I put this together? Why am I? But he's now teaching it, which actually makes it better for him. But now as a teacher, now I'm learning. And I'm learning about my student. And I grew, I grew to, this guy still goes to my church. I love this guy. He's an amazing character. And I see that with you guys. It's like I've heard you wrote music and you wrote a piece for me.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that is really cool. And to see you guys designing t-shirts and to think you're thinking, and now you're doing this podcast, I think this is an amazing way of working out your thoughts. And of course, I've talked a lot today, but listening to you guys and working out your thoughts, for as a teacher, that's exciting for us.
You're hearing, honestly, the work that you tried to teach us come across in a way that we personalized it, really.
Right, but I don't take that much credit because you guys have a lot of good teachers. But I do appreciate the plug,
the honorable,
yeah.
His Excellency.
Yeah. Good
we do have one other teacher we might try and get on for some sort of episode.
He has also appeared in this one, or this podcast. That was a really good segment.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else on education?
That is all the main questions I have.
Do you have anything
No.
for follow-up? Okay, so you mentioned our podcast and how wonderful it is and how great we're doing. We
Absolutely flawless.
Yes. In our speaking and our langualizationalizing.
We never stutter at all.
Oh yeah, but this is all. Believe me, when the whole thing with COVID started, and our church went online. There was such a learning curve. I was horrible when I first got online. I was like, "What in the world? This is the worst thing ever." You're literally looking at your own face while you're preaching. I mean, it's ridiculous.
All you can do is judge.
Yeah,
That's all you can do.
yeah, and I'm like, this isn't. But as it went on, I've gotten more comfortable with it. Now I still do evening devotionals. If I'm going to do a plug, check out our evening devotionals on my Facebook page. And we're starting to go to YouTube now. And with the church, as soon as we can kind of get a better feel with the camera's a little wonky, but I'm learning better, and that's a good thing. That's one of the reasons why I went back to seminary, is keep learning, be lifetime learners. And when you think you know something, read another book, challenge yourself, and read something that's from a different perspective and allow your mind to kind of figure some stuff out. I'm certainly different as a preacher from when I first started 25 years ago, different as a teacher from when I started, nearly 30 years ago, growing and learning and putting stuff together. I don't know that my character in particular is much different, but the way that I think about some things has changed.
Interesting.
Yeah. You just answered a question that I was yet to ask, but was going to, that I just remembered about education. I was going to ask, with all this stuff we've talked about with administration teaching pedagogy and things like that, what can individual students do to make the most out of their education?
That's an excellent question.
Right.
Okay, so I know that your audience can't see this, but I have a bookshelf over behind you guys that has, like the great classics, the great works of pretty much humanity. I mean, I've got 2 different sets, and then part of a third set, and I chose. Okay, so that blue set there, the world's greatest literature or greatest books, I think is what it's called. That blue set I bought when I was 19 years old, or 18. I think I was 18, and I went into a library, and there were 53 volumes, and they wanted $9, and I had 11 in my pocket.
Steal.
And I loaded those up on a what are those things called?
Cart.
Yeah, just on a cart, and took it out to my car, and my hands were shaking. I mean, I know that sounds weird, but my hands were shaking because I never owned a full set of books before like that. Now, I'd read science fiction and comics, and I had novels and a few things, but I had never seen a set of books like that before. And so I loaded them into my car, and I took them home, and I put them up on a bookshelf, and they looked so intelligent. And I remember opening up the first book, and I started reading it, and the thought occurred to me, and I know it sounds really weird, but I deserve this. And I have the opportunity to read any of the great literature or the great writings from all of humanity. And I've got these books right here. And it wasn't a selfish thing. It wasn't like I'm thinking, but it was like, if you want to, you can. But you have to make the choice. So what I would encourage you is to constantly be looking for a way to learn beyond you. And if I want to say where did this educator come from, it started off with at 10 years old I was reading comic books, and comic books taught me ideas of heroism and self-sacrifice and ideas. As I grew in church, I began to read more of the Bible, and the Bible gave me kind of that spiritual foundation that eventually changed my life. And then as I continued to grow and develop and read other things, I began to see a lot of the similar connections through all of these things that they just couldn't go away. Kind of like the golden ratio. Yeah. It all is there. It's just some of those things are more simple than others, and they just kind of broaden out bigger. But it's there. That golden ratio is always there, and it's there with knowledge.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So, any other last questions?
I have none other. Everything you say is gold. I swear. Everything.
Did we want to follow up on any previous episode?
I don't have any questions on those, but if you do.
Which ones did you listen to?
I listened to the fear one completely through, and I listened to the first part of the love languages. I didn't get a chance to listen to the whole thing, but the one on fear was very fascinating.
Thank you.
It actually got cut off. It was twice as long, but the internet recording stuff cut most of it off.
We're getting better, folks.
I don't remember the fear one.
I don't at all.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was us making just more okay, the word's gone. Just using different words for fear repeatedly.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was just that over and over.
Multiple definitions of fear, probably.
Yeah, but that's how education works, right? So you start off with kind of general broad ideas, and then you begin to get more and more specific and a better understanding.
How do we want to define this?
Yeah.
All right, I think that is a great stopping place.
Sure.
That was an amazing discussion.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Kozar, for
no problem.
joining us today.
Yeah, I like talking to you guys again.
He does have some books on the way on education.
It's going to be a while because I have to. What I need to do first, get through seminary. Greek is I got an A on the first class.
Hey, that's good.
But this one's the syntax one is pushing my limit a little bit. So I'll probably still get a B on it anyway. But you know, you try to get an A because it's try to do the best you can.
Of course.
Well, once I get through, I've got about 30 more hours, and it's a 90-hour program, and I've got about 30 hours left to go, so I'm 2/3 of the way through, and then we'll kind of see where I fall. If I end up with a church full time, you know, something like that, then I'll have, you know, 2 days off a week where I can just focus on writing what I want to write. And again, I've got Hairpiece and I've got Savage. And I call it a semi-autobiographical, unauthorized semi-autobiographical story of Groovy Guy, why I teach and how you can get me to quit or something like that.
That is fantastic.
That is the best title.
And it's like got me with my hands out like this, holding up like, and I even drew it. So I've got all these books I'm holding to my two hands. So
that is perfect in every way.
yeah, I'm thinking about actually doing that. And then Hairpiece is definitely, I've been working on Hairpiece on and off for years. So there's like what I would call like short essays that I've just kind of mapped out of things that we need to talk about. And then there was another one called A Shot in the Dark, the story of Kentucky's Education Reform Act, which I would say ultimately was a success, although a very, very expensive one, and one that we need to learn from. And so what I would say is, on one hand, yes, students did write a lot better, and they got better at writing. We got the graduation rates way up, and there were a lot of positives, but it was billions of dollars on the front end, and it needed to. And there was a big scandal. There was what was called Carragate, which I'm like, stop saying gate. I mean, that it was a
How
hotel.
old is that now?
It's like Watergate was like a very specific incident. Stop saying Russiagate and, you know, Chinese virus gate and all these. Stop
Spygate.
Just
saying
because it's
stuff
a
like
scandal doesn't make it a gate.
Right. Stop that. It's like that doesn't make sense. Carragate made no sense whatsoever. What happened was there was like hundreds of thousands of dollars that just disappeared, and then the Commissioner of Education just quit. Yeah. So
That's questionable.
yeah. So we're pretty sure when you read back the articles, and I saved them all from the newspaper in Lexington Herald. When you read back through all those articles, the best I can figure what happened, although never did anybody put it all together. He hired somebody who was going to do all the testing, and this person like walked off with a bunch of money, and then he kind of got his hand slapped for it, but he's basically told, go away and we won't prosecute you. That's pretty much what I came up with. Can't prove it, not going to write it, but it was pretty creepy stuff.
Interesting.
And see, that's what happens when you throw around a lot of money. It doesn't matter, and that's why we have a problem in Congress. Is when there's a bunch of money and you can give yourself a raise, you get creepy.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these characters in Congress are creepy because, you know, there are 300 and some of them are millionaires, and they just keep paying each other off, and they get lobbyists to pay themselves off or get their relatives jobs or whatever. And it's just a big mess. Yeah. And, you know, I'm kind of a simple guy. It's like, just do what you're supposed to be doing, and it's not a big giant deal. You know, try to help some people out, and you know, I don't understand. Okay, this is completely a side thing, but I don't understand where government thinks that they're better than anybody else. You create laws that you know are helpful to the society, but you can't create laws to inhibit freedoms, ever. Like, that's why I go, there's no debate about guns. You're allowed to have guns. It's a God-given right. It's not even a man-given right, and there's a reason why. You go back to the Magna Carta, and it's explained that you have the right to defend yourself, God-given. So if you come at me, you know, like Indiana Jones, you're down, dude. I have that right. Now, do I like that somebody would shoot somebody else? No, but that's a whole different discussion. Is it moral to do that? different discussion, but you can't take away somebody's guns for just a random reason. The same kind of thing goes on all the time. I just roll my eyes and go, you can't do that.
I put up.
Oh, you put up.
I put up the controversy warning.
Oh, did you?
We have a controversy warning that we put up.
Yeah, I saw that. The one about fear, I think, had that.
Warning.
The one about love, I don't remember. One of them did.
One of the ones on reflection does
I think
that.
It was the most recent one.
Yes, because it's all
Was it
about
9?
like you might
9.
be more enlightened for doing so. Listening
Yeah.
to this, and it's
Yeah,
like all
it's like,
positive
it's like
adverse
really
effects.
like passive aggressive. Like side effects of watching this include a renewed sense of independence, frightening realization of personal autonomy and responsibility, and possibly a search for internal meaning.
See that? Well, but see that I would. Oh man, I would. So this is a conversation I would love to have with a class that was diverse in culture. Because I don't believe in different races. I get so irritated with people who keep talking about, that this is all about racism or whatever is about racism. Like, there aren't different races. There are different cultures, and people look different. But you two, like, are dressed in the same shirts and pants.
We're
But
literally wearing the same thing.
We did not plan this.
I know,
at all.
but which is kind of creepy in itself.
This is the second time this has happened.
But you don't look the same. I mean, there's some general things. But your color is different than his color. He's like kind of an orange and you're kind of pink. And you know what I'm saying? But it's like we get into this thing about it's about color and it's like that's not a race. Mm-hmm. A color is not a race. It's never been a race. I don't know where this came from, except the best I can track it back to is Darwin. And he was the one who exploded this whole idea because as you start to look through the Marxist ideas and Stalin's ideas and stuff like that, and then Hitler's ideas, and he thought that they were
there were superior races.
Right, they're superior races, but where did that come from? It came from Darwin.
Absolutely.
I don't agree with Darwin on that. I 100% reject the idea. There are no different races. A man has a darker complexion than me is no different in almost every other area. So why do we do this? And then we sit there and we have these long, protracted polarizations. It's like, dude, I don't care what color you are. Sit down on my couch, and as long as you're not trying to fight me or something like that, we can have a reasonable conversation.
If only the whole world thought that way, that would make everything honestly so much better.
But I just sit there and watch this, and I'm going, what is going on? And I'll tell you what happens. We have watched the media that keeps shaking things up and keep shaking things up and keep shaking things up, and they're no longer reporting the news. They're no longer even looking for facts. They're just not. They don't care. I've never seen anything like it, and I'm not. And I'm talking about all of them. I'm just done. I'm like, I keep watching this, going, that's not true. Stop calling it races. There are different cultures.
There are nationalities which are a human
construction.
Right. And see, that's the
There's
one
nothing
thing.
physical about that other than location.
No, but there is a point. This is why I'm very much about different types of teachers. But see, we need the different types of nations too. And actually those nations give the ability for groups of people to protect themselves. And if we have, which some people are leaning towards, one world nation, you're not going to like what's going to happen, because that means absolute rule. Going back to what I was talking about earlier, if you have government officials who have absolute control, okay, what right do they have to do that? To tell me that I can't have what is my God-given right based on the Constitution? So, like the Michigan governor just got told by her own Supreme Court, after April, you no longer can do what you said you were going to do. So April's already done. You're finished. The legislature said no, you can't do that. Who does the legislator represent? Us, right?
Right.
And if they don't, fire them. But these guys they just keep coming back, and it's like,